Hello everyone, I am Lao Gao. Today we are going to talk about the term 18-jin, which originates from an event in Japan called the Killing Incident. In 1991, in Kyoto Prefecture, Japan, a middle school student, a boy, stole a computer game from a store. The game was called Saori, the Noblewomen of Beautiful Girls, which is an adult game. It tells the story of a girl who is kidnapped by two masked men and held captive in a room. During this time, Saori experiences various fantasies. Most of these fantasies are adult and sexually related, very extreme, and even violate ethical and moral standards. In this game, all the content is shown uncensored. Actually, Japan has long required that such adult works must be censored. Uncensored content is considered illegal. However, in 1991, personal computers hadn't been around for very long, so there were no specific restrictions in the field of computing or game content. Thus, even uncensored content could be sold normally. After this incident was reported by the media, many people's focus shifted from the theft itself to the content that was stolen, which caught a lot of attention. Oh, so this type of content within the city lacks any specific regulatory guidelines allowing minors to access it with ease. In fact, if the boy had purchased it instead of stealing, it might not have even been regarded as an incident. Furthermore, considering that the suspect is a minor, what then? Many parents were very concerned about this issue. They were worried about whether such games could distort their children's understanding of sexuality and crime. Soon, this matter caught the high attention of the Japanese police and political circles. The police immediately sent people to arrest the owners of the game company and the sales company. At that time, the charge for arresting the game company owner and the responsible person of the sales company was called possession for the purpose of distribution. The charge of possessing obscene materials led to the arrest. After these two bosses were arrested, it greatly impacted the Japanese adult gaming industry. So, in April of the next year, major Japanese gaming companies formed an organization called EOCS, the Ethics Organization of Computer Software. This group rates computer software and games. Initially, there were just two categories, general and 18+. This was the first time such categorization appeared. The term 18+ means the product can't be sold to anyone under 18. It's allowed for those 18 and older, but not for those under 18. The general category refers to the age restriction meant that anyone could purchase it. Later in 1994, another level was added, called the general restricted level, which was essentially a 15+ restriction. Finally, in 2011, the general restricted level, originally the 15+, was removed and replaced with recommendations for those aged 15 and above and 12 and above. So, as of now, there are essentially 4 levels. General, which anyone can purchase, 12 and above, 15 and above, and the 18+ with the restricted label. Only the 18+ level carries the restriction label. The 12 and 15 levels do not. Here, I would also like to mention the organization known as Soforin. This rating organization is not a government-established agency, so it essentially does not have legal binding power. It is a self-regulatory body where software companies impose self-restrictions. Therefore, theoretically, the software you create does not necessarily have to go through the ratings and reviews of this organization. So how does it regulate the flow of adult content into the market? It actually does so by regulating the sellers. The Japanese government at various levels requires that if you want to sell software or games, the game you sell must be from a developer that is a member of this organization. If you want to sell this thing, you must go through Soforin and join Soforin. Of course, besides Soforin, Japan also established a computer entertainment rating organization called Zero in 2002, which has one more level than Soforin, dividing into 5 levels, A, B, C, D, and Z. This is often seen on game covers. A is an unrestricted level. Anyone can purchase it, and B is for ages 12 and above. C is intended for individuals aged 15 and older. D is designated for those 17 and above, and Z is specifically for 18 and older, thereby placing a restriction for those who are 17 years of age. Now, regarding the 18+ category, it cannot be exclusively associated with the Saori incident. Prior to it, numerous events laid the groundwork, with Saori acting as a catalyst. These include, for example, in 1986, a company based in Hokkaido, Japan, developed an adult-themed game titled 177. Why 177? Because Article 177 of the Japanese Penal Code delineates the crimes of rape and quasi-rape. The game company used 177 as the title to create a game centered around rape, where you can control the main character to commit rape within the game. I think this is even more serious than the game Killer, as it goes beyond issues of sexual and violent content. It is anti-ethical and even anti-social. When someone noticed this extremely provocative game, they filed a complaint. Then later, a member of the parliament submitted the game to the parliament, hoping that relevant departments would legislate to prevent such games from appearing again. This was the first time in Japan that the content of an adult game was submitted to the parliament for discussion. However, an unexpected result occurred. After the game was submitted to the parliament, it was reported by the news, and many people saw the news on TV and in newspapers, which led to the game selling very well. Then the Japanese parliament immediately requested the game company to stop selling the game, and it became unavailable. As a result, the game was sold at a high price on the black market. Piracy wasn't easy then because the materials needed were expensive, so it wasn't much cheaper. It was 1986 after all, and not many had personal computers. However, the 177 game incident ended with just stopping its sale, and no legislation was enacted to regulate such matters. 3 years later, in 1989, Japan caught a serial killer named Tsutomu Miyazaki, who killed 4 children between 1988 and 1989. The victims were all girls between the ages of 4 and 7. Her method was to abduct them when their parents were not paying attention, then kill them, mutilate the bodies, drink their blood, and eat their flesh. She was somewhat similar to the American cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer we talked about earlier, and you could even say she was more sinister than Dahmer, as she only killed children, with the oldest being just 7 years old. How was she eventually caught? In July 1989, she was caught while abducting a 6-year-old girl. He drove away to escape. During the abduction, he was discovered by the little girl's father, who then drove after him. Miyazaki didn't know he was being followed into a mountainous area where he had actually killed these children. Once they were in the mountains, the girl's father called the police, and when they arrived, they arrested Miyazaki. This person, Miyazaki, not only desecrated bodies but also had a compulsion for lying and multiple personalities, each with different disturbing preferences. Some were pedophilic, some necrophilic, some liked drinking blood, and others enjoyed eating flesh. Each of his personalities was extremely terrifying, but he insisted that his primary personality was normal. He kept arguing that the crimes were not committed by his own personality. However, the Japanese court ultimately determined that he was legally responsible and sentenced him to death. Concerning Miyazaki Tsutomu, we could potentially create a dedicated video to elaborate further on him in the future. He was indeed an exceptionally rare and possibly even more brutal individual in history than Hannibal. After his capture, an extensive collection of obscene material, videotapes, games, and comics was discovered in his residence. He was an extreme recluse, spending the majority of his time at home engaging with these materials. The most significant impact of the Miyazaki Tsutomu serial murder case on Japanese society was not actually the murders themselves. It was the manga collection in his room that led individuals to associate otakus with serial murderers. Consequently, for an extended period, there existed a specific taboo in Japan concerning the term otaku. If someone was labeled as an otaku, individuals would perceive them as quite which significantly impacted Japan's anime industry. It was from this juncture that a discussion emerged in Japanese society regarding whether these creative works, whether they be manga, films, games, or novels, could genuinely influence people's mental well-being. You might have noticed that in the movies and games we usually watch, there's a lot of violence. Think about it. Which movie doesn't have 2 or 3 people getting killed? It's often the case where the bad guys kill the good guys, and then the good guys seek revenge and wipe out all the bad guys, right? It's quite normal for dozens or even hundreds of people to die in a series. But if you think about it, it's all violent content. And it's even more obvious in games. Many games are about killing as a goal and for fun. The most obvious examples might be PUBG or shooting games like that. If you can shoot someone in the head with one shot, then you're impressive. But isn't this a violent element? There's also the famous game GTA 5, Grand Theft Auto, a well-known crime simulation game. In it, all your money, house, and cars come from crime. If you don't commit crimes, you can't survive in that world. It's that kind of vibe. Do you think this affects people's mindset in reality? When the debate was heated, society split into 2 camps. One side believed content with sexual and violent elements could indeed lead to crime, because it might stimulate a sense of pleasure towards crime in people, or give them some misconceptions about crime. In the game, if you kill someone, you don't have to bear any legal responsibility, but that's not the case in reality. This perspective suggests that playing violent games excessively might lead to violent tendencies. On the contrary, another viewpoint suggests that engaging in such violent games can relieve inner pressure, thereby reducing crime rates. In fact, there are quite a few cases where violent games have ultimately led to crime. For instance, on January 18, 2022, there was an 18-year-old teenager in Pakistan who, while playing PUBG, a battle royale game, He locked himself at home for several days, and his family was very worried about him, hoping he would stop playing games. As a result, in a fit of anger, he first shot and killed his mother, then his 2 sisters. When his brother came back home, he shot and killed him too, thus killing his entire family. When the police asked him why he did it, he said that he hadn't been performing well in the game these past few days, so he used his family members to make up for it. He thought that maybe the number of people he killed wasn't enough, so he used his family to make up for it. And he believed that his family might come back to life like in the game after being killed. At the time, he said that was his mindset, but when they didn't come back to life, he realized that this was the real world. Actually, I have some personal experience in this area. When I was in college, I used to run a game server. Initially, everyone was having a great time playing, and it wasn't particularly violent or criminal content, just the usual monster fighting and leveling up. However, over time, 2 underclassmen got into a real-life fight over something in the game, possibly related to equipment. The 2 of them initiated a confrontation in the real world over some related content. Subsequently, I decided to shut down the game server. This incident led me to understand that games can indeed provoke disputes. Furthermore, I am convinced that the notion that games can alleviate some individual's stress and deter them from committing crimes is not particularly valid. For instance, if I enjoy consuming meat, and every day you offer me some imitation meat, like pixelated chicken or tofu-like substitutes, do you really think I would lose the desire to eat meat? Or you might express that I enjoy consuming cola, so I have the virtual character in the game continually drink cola, and then I won't desire to drink it anymore. Naturally, I believe that in the future it might become feasible, correct? When artificial intelligence progresses to a certain level, such simulations will not only be visual, but also replicate taste and physical sensations. Then individuals might genuinely feel satisfied and won't seek various kinds of stimulation. However, until that time arrives, at least for the present moment, I believe asserting that violent games can alleviate violence might be somewhat unfounded. It's about whether content with sex and violence affects people's psychology. This research has been ongoing. In 2014, 3 researchers from the well-known Catholic University, Villanova University, and the Research University, Rutgers University, published a report in the American Psychological Journal of Popular Media Culture Psychology. The report was titled Violent Games and Real-World Violence, Rhetoric and Data. The report indicates that they analyzed the relationship between the sales of violent games from 2007 to 2001 and the number of homicide crimes. They found that when the sales of shooting games were at their highest, the crime rate tended to decrease. They don't know what causes this, but there is a tendency in the data. They think it might be because these shooting games make people lose interest in crime, possibly reducing violent tendencies. However, they tend to believe that playing games occupies the time of these potential criminals, keeping them in front of the TV and away from committing crimes. They think this might be the reason, and through their research, they reach 2 conclusions. The first is that people with violent tendencies may prefer violent games, but there is no evidence to suggest that playing violent games causes violent tendencies. In other words, if you are not a person with violent tendencies, playing these games will not make you a violent person. Another conclusion is that although it cannot be proven that games can reduce crime, there is also no evidence that violent games increase crime. In fact, these 2 points are essentially saying the same thing, one from the perspective of people and the other from the perspective of games. What does it ultimately mean? It means there is no evidence to prove that violent games increase violent crime. The research team believes that the ultimate factor determining violent crime is still the person, not the game itself. The game might not even be considered a triggering factor. Also, in 2014, the Institute of Cultural and Social Studies at the University of Tokyo in Japan published a research report titled The Impact of Violent Games on the Brain, Long-Term Effects on Facial Recognition and Short-Term Effects on Aggression. This was based on actual experiments, not just data. They selected some subjects and had them play these violent games to observe their brain activity. Some changes or variations in reaction speed were observed. It was found that after playing violent games for 20 to 30 minutes, aggression suddenly increased, but this was limited to males. No similar situation was found in females. Males would suddenly exhibit a slight tendency towards violence, but this tendency would quickly fade. However, after long-term experiments, a rather alarming result was discovered: long-term playing of violent games. It indeed has a prolonged impact on individuals' capacity to recognize facial expressions. They discovered that after the participants engaged in gaming for an extended period, their speed in identifying angry expressions was noticeably slower than it was prior to their gaming sessions. Individuals became slower to respond to anger, whether it pertains to the emotion itself or others' angry expressions. This could be attributed to their exposure to numerous angry scenes within the games, rendering them less sensitive to anger. This effect is not fleeting or short-lived, but rather enduring. Over an extended duration, individuals' sensitivity to anger will gradually diminish. This prolonged period, according to their testing intervals, extends up to approximately 3 months. Consequently, after engaging in the game and subsequently abstaining from it for 3 months, their ability to swiftly recognize angry expressions diminishes. Whether this deceleration in recognizing angry expressions will lead to any issues remains under investigation. Speaking of this, you might have a few inquiries. The research data and experiments I previously mentioned are all targeted at adults. Are there any studies specifically focused on children? In fact, experiments on children and minors are not allowed, meaning you can't have some kids play games to see if they develop violent tendencies. However, the research team at the University of Bristol in the UK has some data. They have tracking data on 1-800 children born between 1991 and 1992. This is not an intervention study, meaning they didn't make them play games. Instead, they selected some who had already played games to observe their changes. It was found that if people played violent games at the ages of 8 to 9, the likelihood of developing aggressive and meaningful emotions in the future would slightly increase. However, this cannot be considered a significant impact. Overall, it is believed that violent games do not have a direct relationship with the formation of a person's future character or their development of depression. Later, in April 2015, a study by Oxford University in the UK also concluded that the negative impact of violent games on children's behavior is not greater than that of other types of games. They believe that what might have a significant impact is the duration of gameplay, rather than the type of game. The length of time spent playing games is not related to the type of game, and in fact, this could indeed be the case. When someone plays games for a long time, they remain in a state of excitement. If a person stays in an excited state for an extended period over time, they gradually find it harder to feel excited and may feel bored, which can eventually lead to negative emotions and depression. Additionally, if a person remains in a tense and excited state for a long time, they may not feel fatigue. Some people don't even feel hunger. This actually has a physical impact on our bodies, affecting not only the brain, but also having a direct impact on the body. So my conclusion is that the content of the game might not be the key factor. Although personally, I feel that violent and pornographic content does have a psychological impact on people, whether they are adults or children. However, research data shows the impact of this content on people isn't very significant. Most people can distinguish reality, and if someone can't, that's their personal issue. However, research has indeed found that the length of time spent playing games might have a greater impact on individuals. To put it simply, it's similar to dependency, akin to drug addiction, where the brain remains in a state of excitement, and over time, as you gradually stop feeling excited, you start seeking even greater thrills. You might end up doing some dangerous things. If you don't do these dangerous things, you might go to the other extreme and find everything boring. And gradually you might become depressed. Anyway, no matter what, you can't let yourself stay in a state of excitement all the time. Even if the game is really fun, you should know when to stop, right? This way you can keep your mind clear and healthy. Alright, that's it for today's video. I hope everyone can take some time to rest while enjoying themselves. See you in the next video. Hi, bye.